In a luxurious restaurant, a white waiter denies service to a black teenager, unaware that the boy's father owns the establishment. This moment will ignite a struggle against prejudice, unearthing deep-seated animosity and changing the lives of everyone involved. The unfolding events will surprise even the most discerning of observers. But let's start from the beginning. James, a teenager proud of his recent academic success, decides to celebrate by visiting his family's favorite restaurant alone. He has just won an award for his science project and wants to mark the occasion, even if by himself. As he steps inside, he takes in the familiar atmosphere with joy. The dim lighting, pleasant aromas from the kitchen, soft music. He's dined here countless times with his father, but he has no idea that tonight will be different. Thomas, a young waiter, notices James from the doorway. Recently hired, he's used to a certain type of clientele that frequents the restaurant. Seeing James alone, he immediately decides that this is an undesirable customer. Adjusting his tie, he approaches James with a look of displeasure. "Can I help you?" he asks coldly, crossing his arms and tilting his head slightly to appear taller and more intimidating. James smiles and responds calmly. "Yes, I'd like a table by the window, if that's possible." Thomas doesn't respond right away, but his gaze says it all. He sizes up James from head to toe, weighing whether he belongs in this setting. A sarcastic smile appears on his face. "You know, this isn't fast food," Thomas says, barely concealing his disdain. "We cater to people who can actually afford to dine here." James is taken aback. He's used to being warmly received here. He and his father have been patrons for years. He tries to explain. "My dad and I come here often. I always order steak and a Caesar salad. I could even tell you my order right now." But Thomas cuts him off, stepping back as if to create distance. "Look, kid, this is a respectable establishment, and to be honest, you don't fit our usual clientele. You might want to find somewhere else. We need to maintain certain standards." James is stunned. He's always been taught to carry himself with respect and dignity, yet he now faces blatant injustice. He feels a wave of resentment, but tries to keep his composure. Looking around, he notices other patrons watching them. Some turn away, while others observe with interest, but no one intervenes. James decides not to escalate the conflict, hoping that everything will be clarified once his father arrives. He pulls out his phone and quickly dials his father, feeling humiliated yet determined not to leave until the matter is resolved. Mr. Wilson, James's father, answers almost immediately. James quickly and agitatedly tells him what happened. A few minutes later, he sees his father enter the restaurant. Tall and confident, Mr. Wilson immediately spots Thomas at the entrance and heads straight toward him. Thomas, seeing an adult approaching, starts to feel nervous. He realizes this must be James's father, but still feels entitled to screen the customers. Trying to keep a straight face, he addresses Mr. Wilson politely but coolly. "Good evening, sir. How can I assist you?" "Good evening," Mr. Wilson replies calmly, scrutinizing the waiter with a steady gaze. "I'd like to know why you refuse to serve my son." Thomas pales slightly, but maintaining his superior tone answers. "Sir, your son came in alone without a reservation, and, well, he doesn't exactly meet our client profile. We aim to keep a high level of quality and tranquility for our guests." Mr. Wilson starts to see through the excuse of quality and tranquility. Looking at James, he notices how deeply the humiliation has affected his son and decides not to let the incident slide. Without raising his voice, he says, "You may not realize, but I own this restaurant, and my son has every right to be served here, just like any other customer." Mr. Wilson's words make Thomas go pale. Silence falls over the surrounding tables, and guests who overheard the conversation start whispering, realizing they are witnessing something significant. With no arguments left, Thomas only manages a weak cough as he tries to justify himself. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just trying to uphold standards," he stammers, his voice trembling with embarrassment. But Mr. Wilson cuts him off before he can finish his excuse. "Your standards, as I see it, involve discriminating against guests based on skin color. That is unacceptable in my restaurant. I insist that you change not only your attitude toward my son, but also toward all clients, regardless of their appearance or background." Left with no choice, Thomas apologizes to James, feeling humiliated in front of both guests and colleagues. James looks at his father with pride, realizing that this incident has not only exposed the waiter's prejudice, but has also set an example for everyone present. Father and son make their way to the table James chose, while the guests around them begin discussing what happened. When Mr. Wilson and James finally sit down, the tension in the room becomes palpable. Patrons whisper to each other, waitstaff exchange uneasy glances, and Thomas, aware that everyone's attention is now focused on him, has to return to the table to provide the most challenging service of his career. Thomas approaches their table, trying to keep a calm exterior, and quietly says, "Good evening, I will bring you the menu." Mr. Wilson, seizing the moment, doesn't miss the chance to conclude the conflict definitively. He looks Thomas straight in the eyes and says, "Bring us the menu, of course. But first, I would like you to apologize to my son, and not just apologize, but understand why what you did was wrong." Thomas feels a wave of shame. He had always been confident, even somewhat arrogant, but now he realizes he has no grounds for excuses. It feels like the whole room is waiting for his response. Thomas reluctantly gathers himself, takes a deep breath, and looking at James says, "I'm sorry, James, I was wrong." His voice trembles, but he continues, feeling everyone's eyes on him. "This was my first day here, and I didn't think my actions could come across as biased. I just wasn't used to seeing young people your age, especially alone, in this kind of place." James maintains his composure, but his voice is firm. "I understand people make mistakes, but this should not happen on this level. I don't want others to go through what I just experienced." These words make Thomas realize how deeply his actions could wound another person. His face loses its haughty look. Now he feels not only shame, but also a growing inner conflict. For the first time, he understands that he showed disrespect and distrust based on biases he hadn't even been aware of. Thomas doesn't respond but only nods, looking down as he walks away to get the menu. However, the matter isn't quite over. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager, having observed the incident, steps in to address Mr. Wilson and James, offering his apologies. "Mr. Wilson, James, on behalf of the restaurant, I sincerely apologize. I'm very sorry that such an incident occurred here. We will conduct additional staff training and emphasize cultural sensitivity. We want every guest to feel comfortable here." Mr. Wilson thanks the manager, adding that he wants to be assured that real changes will be made to prevent such incidents in the future. His calm, confident tone emphasizes the importance of the issue, indicating that this is not just a personal incident, but a lesson for the entire organization. Hearing the manager's promises, Thomas feels a surge of embarrassment. He realizes that the incident has not only put him in an awkward position with management, but has also forced him to confront his own biases. He had never considered how superficial judgments could affect others. Now, he feels guilt and a desire to change, although he isn't sure how to start. When the manager leaves, Mr. Wilson and James finally sit together alone. James, feeling somewhat uplifted by his father's support, realizes that tonight has been a lesson for him as well. He sees how his father not only defended him, but also exemplified how to stand up for one's rights with dignity and fairness. Meanwhile, a quiet discussion continues around their table. Some guests nod approvingly at Mr. Wilson, admiring his restraint and confidence. Others, who witnessed the incident, exchange their own thoughts about the lesson in equality and respect they all just witnessed. The next day, Thomas returns to work feeling uneasy. He can't forget the humiliation he experienced when he realized he had refused to serve the owner's son. The words of James and Mr. Wilson echo in his mind, leaving a mark that goes beyond a simple apology, forcing him to reflect on his biases. The manager meets Thomas before his shift and, taking him aside, explains that the management has decided to implement cultural sensitivity training. The manager does not hide his disappointment and sternly advises Thomas to reconsider his views and approach to customer service. Thomas feels a flash of protest, He believes he was only trying to maintain standards, as he was told. Yet, as Thomas starts his shift and notices that employees, and even some customers, now regard him with disapproval, he feels that people's perception of him has shifted. Even those who might have previously agreed with him now judge him for his narrow-mindedness. At that moment, he understands that he cannot simply ignore what happened. Over the following weeks, the restaurant changes. New training sessions are held, and the managers revisit the service policies, emphasizing that every guest should feel respected. Thomas participates in these training sessions, reluctantly at first, but gradually comes to understand that his apologies to James and his father hadn't been sincere. He realizes he truly had biases that affected others without his awareness. Several weeks after the incident, Thomas has the chance to serve James and Mr. Wilson again when they return to the restaurant. This time, Thomas approaches their table with a different attitude, no longer haughty or detached, but with genuine respect. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson, James," he says with a slight smile. "Thank you for coming back to our restaurant. I'm glad to see you again." Mr. Wilson nods in response, while James, sensing the change in the waiter's tone, smiles and thanks Thomas. They place their order, and Thomas, eager to demonstrate his newfound outlook, serves them with utmost courtesy and attentiveness, understanding that this incident has been both a professional and personal turning point for him. As Mr. Wilson and James finish their meal, Thomas sincerely thanks them, saying, "Thank you for allowing me to recognize my mistakes. I've had to reconsider many things since then." Mr. Wilson smiles and replies, "I hope this experience has taught you not to judge by first impressions. Everyone deserves respect." As Mr. Wilson and James leave the restaurant, Thomas feels that this evening has marked the culmination of his transformation.